In this introduction, I usually share some highlights of the South African delegation visit to the inspiring annual Achieving the Dream conference in the USA. For those of you who haven't attended, it's a conference of some 2,000 delegates representing over 200 community colleges, with everybody there to share their passion for student success. It's a truly inspiring occasion, and I hope that at some stage, every one of you in the room will have an opportunity to join. But this year, rather than my reporting on some of the highlights, we are bringing some of the top highlights here. And so we are particularly pleased to be able to welcome two persons, Karen Stout and Michael Sorrell, to join us. Bill is going to introduce them in more detail, but let me just say on behalf of South Africans that we are hugely grateful for your preparedness to share your experience with us and to engage with us extensively. Now, to begin with, I just want to make sure that you are familiar with the program. There are various ways in which you can get it. You can have good old-fashioned print style in your folders. Otherwise, it can be found on an app on your phone, or you can go to the website. I'm also asked to say to you there is a Twitter hashtag, which is hashtag Siya2019. Last year, and I think we're going to repeat it this year, there will be a prize for the most prolific, perhaps the most imaginative tweeter of the conference. What about the format of this particular program of conference? Well, we took your feedback quite seriously, and in many cases we were getting very positive feedback of the way in which we'd organized it last year. And so we've retained those aspects of for which there was positive feedback. But one of the things that we were concerned about was trying to make student voices clearer and louder in this conference. And so this year we have 5 delegates to the conference who are going to play an important role, and you'll particularly see that important role on Thursday. And it's my privilege to welcome each one of them here. And I hope you're all here, otherwise I'll have to do this in absentia, which I don't really want to do. Lawrence Langwa from Nelson Mandela University, are you here? Thank you very much. Roshli Bosman from the University of Pretoria. Right. Lerato Mokati from the University of the Free State. Kholagano Vena from the University of the Witwatersrand. You I know are here, so. Great, you ran away to the back of the room, I see. Okay. And then finally from the Durban University of Technology, we have Sibusiso Zuma. Where is Sibusiso? Oh, that was only half a stand-up. Welcome to all of you, and we look forward to hearing some of your reflections on this conference at the end on Thursday. Now, what can we say about the program? We have some important threads this year. We're looking at institutional approaches to student success. We look at managing support for student success, and we're looking at overcoming some key barriers. But this is also 5 years after the beginning of Siyaphumelela, so it is time for some reflection. And so we've tried to reflect a bit on the overall progress that has been made, particularly by the Siyaphumelela partners. And that will be the emphasis of the Deputy Vice-Chancellor's panel tomorrow afternoon, as well as some of the presentations from each of the institutions where they are highlighting one of the key aspects of the Siyaphumelela program that they introduced at their institutions. And then there's also a lot to share from other institutions who have joined us for this conference. But we also have some new developments. We have seen growing system commitment to student success. That has already been evident in the way the Department of Higher Education and Training has supported student success through the University Development Grant. And I think it would be fair to say that without that support from DHET, we wouldn't be nearly where we are at the moment. Secondly, the Council on Higher Education has also joined the agenda by highlighting student success in various of their processes. And then last year, the University South Africa came together, and the Vice-Chancellors, that's the Association of the Vice-Chancellors, for a really inspiring workshop run by Georgia State University. And at the end of those 2 days amongst those Vice-Chancellors, this was some of the outcomes. First of all, the meeting recognized the huge diversity across the system in terms of geography, size, makeup, availability of financial and human resources. So they were recognizing that. They also recognized that some universities had already for a long time embarked on student success interventions. But they wanted to propose 3 goals for the system as we move forward. So here is a kind of commitment from the university sector, if you like. First of all, they wanted to improve throughput rates across the 3 categories. They wanted to eliminate or reduce achievement gaps amongst gender, race, and income levels. And they wanted to construct an inclusive, conducive, and enabling student experience. So those were the 3 goals that came up in the discussion of the Vice-Chancellors. And they had 4 principles that they enunciated in the course of the discussion, informed by social justice agenda of access, inclusion, and success. They defined, and this is important, student success in a holistic manner to include graduate attributes and employability. That students would no longer be labeled at-risk students or underprepared students, and that there was a commitment to sharing substantially across the system. These are really important principles to follow if there's going to be a national movement. So where are we now in student success as we've completed this 5-year period? Now, we've defined student success in this particular way, and now it becomes important for us to look at student completion because it is a necessary contributor to student success. And first of all, we look at some throughput rates. Now, generally in South Africa, universities get a very bad press in this regard. Only last week, a very senior journalist at a very prestigious daily newspaper wrote that only 10% of students in South Africa who reach university complete in minimum time. Where did he get that information? Where did his newspaper check that his information was correct? Now, yes, it is true that our throughput in minimum time, in other words, those students who start at the beginnings, I've taken various cohorts. So those students in the blue one is who started in 2004. Where were they in M+1, 1 year afterwards, 2 years afterwards, and 3 years afterwards? And so what we see here is that already for the 2012 intake, we were at above 30%, not the 10% that the newspaper reported. And moreover, we can see we have grown quite substantially over this period. From 2004, we were sort of sitting at 26%, and now we are over 30%. But if we have a look further, we can see that after 1 year, our rates increased dramatically. And particularly over the last few years, we have seen how M+1 means that a good proportion of our students are in fact passing. And when we get to M+2, we're talking about 30% of our 60% of our students are passing in the basic time +2, in other words, a 5-year period. 60-something percent, over 60% of those who started will have completed after 5 years. That is actually a reasonable completion rate. What it isn't is it should be in a shorter time, because every year you stay at university 1 year longer, you're keeping somebody else out for 1 year more. So this is for the contact students, and this is just undergraduate 3-year degrees to make sure that we're comparing apples with apples. Now, unfortunately, that is not so good for 3-year diplomas, because their 3-year diplomas, we are just, for the minimum time, we are just above the 20. We now got to about 25%, so it's much less good than the degrees. But other than that, we see the same kind of improvements for each of the cohorts that we have there, and particularly a pretty high rate for the M+2. That rate over there, we're sitting again at 54 or so percent. So we have made good progress over the period. But if we try and look at what does that mean by different groups? And so we come to one of something that is getting to be a pattern in different parts of the world, is differences among gender. And what we do see here is that women have done for a long time and continue to do much better than men at every point of the journey. So this time, again, on the axis there, on the vertical axis, we've got the percentage, and then we've looked at the 2006 cohort, what they were looking like after, this is after 3 years, and then this is after 5 years. And then similarly, we've looked at the 2012 after 3 years. There's something crept in the middle. Sorry, after 2012 after minimum time, then 2012 over 5 years, and then finally the 2015 cohort. Now, what we see here is again huge developments, and we do see that if we compare 3 years, we've also had growth over time. So if you compare 2006 and we compare 2015, we'll see that 2015 is considerably better than 2006. Then we can look at throughput by group. And once again, we unfortunately see a traditional South African pattern here. It's not that in the previous one, it's not that men are less clever than women. It's that something is happening there which we need to understand and which we need to put interventions in place to ensure that our male students do much better. Similarly, we have that when we compare different groups, and you'll see, as you would have expected in the South African situation, given all the privileges that white students have had over generations, that white students do much better. After 3 years, here's the 3-year one, here's a bit later, and here is a bit later still. And you will see that in 2015, we are doing considerably better than for all the groups than we were doing in 2006. But unfortunately, there still are these kinds of discrepancies, and that is what the Vice-Chancellors were hoping to overcome to ensure that we no longer have those differences amongst groups. When we break the groups down even further, and we have a look at groups by race and gender, we see again the improvements in all of them. If you look over here, minimum time and minimum time here, you'll see great improvements. But in each case, what you will see is that male students are particularly behind the curve. And that is particularly true for African and colored male students. And once again, we need to understand what is occurring here. What are the bigger things in the society, other things that we as universities are doing, so that we can get to a situation where we have eliminated those differences amongst the different groups. So this needs to be top of our mind, these issues, the improvements that we need over our whole system in the next few years. And those issues that we need, throughput in minimum time, and at least if we give students a grace of 1 year while they make up their minds what it is they want to do, we have to increase our completion rates by M+1 as well. and hope that after that we have very few students who are left in the system. Most of the students will have completed. We need to eliminate the gender differences, and we need to eliminate the group differences. And these things need to be top of mind as we plan the next phase of Siyaphumelela. And I'm pleased to announce that on Thursday, we will be sharing with all of you some ideas which we have for Siyaphumelela 2 for the next 3 to 4 year period. So this will be a period of learning for us at this conference, but always it's a period not only of looking back, but also of looking forward so that we can plan purposefully of making this a better system for South African higher education. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny, for that terrific introduction to sort of the background of what we're facing in South Africa. I have to say, I think if I had been a South African citizen, I think I know how I would have voted a few weeks ago. But I think right now my vote may be more important in another country next year. But I also think it's, that data about the disaggregated race and gender throughput rate and cohort completion rate can be sobering, and it's depressing. And we see similar numbers in the United States. In fact, exactly the same, that men in every racial and ethnic group trail women, and that typically whites are doing better than other racial and ethnic groups. But one thing to keep in mind, and this is something that makes me optimistic about the future, is that we are already seeing institutions, there's parts of the ATD family are seeing this. Georgia State has famously seen all of their equity outcomes flatten. Everyone is graduating at the same rate. And so, this is not an impossible dream. This is something that can be accomplished. And some of the things that you'll be talking about and learning about and discussing over the next few days are exactly those kind of techniques. And to suffice it to say that the challenge is not about making students better. It's about making institutions better, and about having people look at the institutions that they work in and say, could we be doing a better job to support students? This idea that if they're good enough to admit, they're probably good enough to be supported to graduate. And I think that's really important. But I want to thank Jenny again, and Alan, and the entire Sadie family for doing all the work they do every year to make the Siyaphumelela Conference succeed. I want to thank all of you, all the delegates who've come from across South Africa to join us. I want to especially thank our American guests, Michael Sorrell and Karen Stout, for crossing the Atlantic and for being, I think, on like day 2 of the jet lag cycle. So they'll be, they're going to power through it, but I know how tough that can be. I also want to let you know that you will hear more about Kresge tomorrow from our president. He's on a plane right now on his way from Colorado, on his way to South Africa right now. But for those of you who are new to Siyaphumelela and new to Kresge, I thought I'd give you just a little bit of background. We're a private foundation founded about 100 years ago in the United States. The benefactor of our foundation's endowment founded a chain of department stores in the United States called the Kresge Department Stores that later became the Kmart stores, and these were discount stores. That company has not had any ties to the foundation for about 50 years and is now part of Sears, which is another large department store in the United States. And so we have nothing to do with them, so if you read about the Kmart stores or Sears stores, it's not really about us. But the foundation today focuses really on promoting opportunity for low-income people in America's cities. I did say America's cities. Johannesburg is not an American city, although actually it looks like a lot of American cities. And Rip will talk a little bit more about why we do our work in South Africa. But our education work in both South Africa and the United States, and our only international work is here in South Africa in our education work, is really about opportunities to build access and success for low-income, first-generation, and underrepresented students with an eye towards reducing and ideally eliminating equity outcomes gaps. So those lines you saw just a few minutes ago will eventually, we hope, go away. Now we have 3 main strategies in our education team. The first one is pathways to college or university. This is about that transition from high school to college to make it more meaningful, more thoughtful, and more supportive, or about bringing students back to universities after they've maybe started a family. This is a particularly acute problem in the United States, where we have, I believe, 36 to 39 million people who have some college but no degree. And the idea is, how can we get them back? The second, and this is really where Siyaphumelela fits in, is this idea of building the capacity of the institutions that serve our students. Now, every university or college in America says they do, but certain institutions demonstrably do. That's community colleges, where about half of all Americans go to college. It's HDIs, which we call minority-serving institutions, like historically black colleges and universities, and it's also public institutions. Now, these institutions often have a mission to serve low-income and first-generation students. The challenge is they don't always serve them as well as they'd like to. So the idea is, how can we build their capacity to serve students better? That might be better governance. It might be better management. It might be using big data. It could be any number of things that if they can use this information more effectively, they do a better job of meeting their goals, which means that students can persevere and can succeed themselves. Now, the idea here fundamentally in South Africa is that Siyaphumelela is. It's this idea of helping students succeed and helping universities succeed. And that's, of course, why it's Siyaphumelela. It means we succeed. Finally, we're trying to strengthen what we call the urban higher education ecosystem. This is this idea where a college could be both an educational institution and ideally serving its local community, but also a good neighbor. And so in South Africa, we've worked with the University of Pretoria, for example, to develop the Mamelodi campus and also some of the Hatfield campus to make those neighborhoods safer, friendlier to students, nicer places to live for students and faculty, and also in Mamelodi to really create a series of resources for that community that traditionally, of course, because of apartheid, didn't have as many resources. So that's what we're sort of doing in the three strategies. Now, as Jenny said, this is the fifth Siyaphumelela conference we've had, and I thought it would be interesting to share with you why I'm so optimistic about this work, both in the United States and in South Africa, and some of the trends we're seeing. The first trend, and I think those of you who were in Karen's earlier workshop, is an increasing interest in the non-academic, non-classroom barriers to student success: transit, hunger, housing. Now, this is not to say that if you have housing, you will get a degree, but it is to say that many students pursuing degrees or certificates have a barrier when they don't have good housing or have food or don't have good transit. They're not able to participate fully as students in the institutions. So we're looking at these kinds of things increasingly in the United States. We're also seeing a lot of interest in artificial intelligence and things like advising. And I know that some of the Siyaphumelela grantees have been talking to AdmitHub, which is a company in the United States, which is using artificial intelligence-based systems to really leverage human advisors to answer more ordinary questions. And this has been very, very effective for many students in the United States. Another thing that we're seeing is an increasing focus on developmental education as one of the primary barriers in community colleges. Developmental education is when a student arrives at a community college, which is typically open access, and they can't yet do college-level math typically, but sometimes English. And what they find is maybe up to about 70% of all students are in this category. And this is the black hole for many community colleges, because only about 10% of students ever make it out on average. We're seeing incredible research on changing pedagogy and curriculum that can change this dramatically to get 50, 60% of students who go into these courses into college-level math classes, for example, within a year. And this is an amazing turnaround that we're seeing a lot of expansion of in the United States. And I know that the University of the Free State is looking at Carnegie's work in this regard and seeing if there might be applications here in South Africa. We're also seeing steady increases in post-secondary attainment. About 10 years ago, when we started this work in the United States, 38% of all adults had a post-secondary credential. Today, it's 48%. It's increasing by about, and early on it was increasing by about 0.3%, 0.4%. It's now increasing on about 1 percentage point a year. And so we really see very strong likelihood that we will be in the mid-50s within a few years. And this is a tremendous change. It opens up opportunities for millions and millions of people to have a decent quality of life, to join the American middle class. So it's very exciting to us. The other side of this is now 69% of all recent high school graduates, and we now have the highest high school graduation rates in our history, are now going on to college within 2 years. So again, we're seeing a significant shift in the way Americans see higher education as critically important to the 21st century. And then finally, of course, is this huge discussion of the cost of college, which is not lost on this audience. And we're seeing an increasing interest in looking at making the first 2 years of college, community college, free in many cities and states in the United States. And we see this as a way that we can have people flourish in the 21st century economy when you need more than just a high school diploma to get a good job. Similarly, in South Africa, I'm seeing some things that are making me excited. Of course, as you know, the government has now made university free for all families with incomes under 350,000 Rand, $25,000. We think this has great opportunities, but of course it's critically important that the students succeed, that the students who've had these other barriers removed, or many of them removed, get the kind of support they need to really succeed. We're seeing a growing interest in third stream income as a way to bring in additional funds to the university system. And in particular, we're seeing a tremendous growth in philanthropic income. I was just in Cape Town yesterday, and Inyatello has a survey called Aspire, and they've been doing this for 5 years. Over the last 5 years, the amount of private funds raised by 11 of the country's universities and technical universities has more than doubled, from 659 million Rand in 2014 to 1.7 billion Rand in 2017. And this is a tremendous increase. When we started working on promoting private giving in South Africa, many people thought it was impossible to raise private funds in South Africa for higher education, or that maybe just one university in the country would be able to do it. And we're proving that many institutions can do this with the right tools. And it looks like even things like fees must fall. Some people thought that might result in a decrease in giving. But in many cases, donors said, we want to be part of solving that problem. And that included students at many campuses as well as alumni. Finally, we're seeing really great interest in evidence-based, big data, thoughtful interventions on campus. It's not about creating an app. It's about asking, what is the problem we're trying to solve, and what's the most effective, efficient way to solve that problem? What could we do on our campus so that students aren't failing that big gateway math class? How can we help our students who are commuting from a distant township to make sure they're getting the kind of tutoring they need, maybe closer to home? And so we're seeing these increases in throughput rates. And I don't think this is an accident. I think these are changes that have been going on for the last 5 or 6 years. This year, as Jenny said, the Siyaphumelela conference is really looking at a variety of things. Things like increasing academic advisors in the South African context, the first year experience, food security, data analytics, early warning systems, a lot of the same things we're seeing, as I said, in the United States. I know you're going to have a lot of opportunities to hear from some wonderful colleagues about some great ideas they're testing. They're also, I think, going to be candid and talk about where it's not working so that you're not out there trying it yourself and then wasting your time. And that's part of the Siyaphumelela message, that it's about transparency and transformation, and about sharing what we know, sharing what we're trying, and trying to do what works, and also giving you a warning, this isn't something that was effective at this institution or that. So I hope you'll be inspired and excited by the next couple of days. And again, I want to thank all of you for joining us. And it's just a pleasure to have you here. I couldn't be more excited. So thank you. Now it gives me great pleasure to introduce our first plenary speaker of the 2019 Siyaphumelela Conference, Dr. Karen Stout, who's president and CEO of Achieving the Dream, which you'll also hear many in the room call ATD. Dr. Stout has served as president of ATD since 2015 and And as many of you know, ATD really created the U.S. student success movement about 15 years ago. It was founded originally with significant help from the Lumina Foundation, another big foundation in the United States, but Kresge, the Gates Foundation, and many other foundations have been actively supporting ATD over the last several years. And we've been trying to sort of really change the dialogue, and this is really what ATD has done. It has changed the dialogue in the United States about what the purpose and value of higher education is and what the role of higher education institutions has to be. ATD looked at the high failure rate in community colleges and said, this can't continue. We've got to figure out a better way. And so armed with evidence-based change and a desire to eliminate equity gaps, they've been at this work and really seen some tremendous successes. And about a third of all community colleges, there are 1,100 in the country, so about 280, I think, Karen can correct me, are in ATD now. Karen came to Achieving the Dream from Montgomery County Community College in suburban Philadelphia, and she herself was a well-known leader in the community college space. She had served as a leadership coach in ATD. She had also been on the Aspen Institute Excellence faculty. This is a prize, Kresge also supports this as well as other foundations, a prize given every couple of years to the community colleges that are really moving the needle. And then ATD also has an annual prize it gives at the conference. But she's worked in this area. She's been on several leading boards nationally and things like the College Promise Campaign and on the Community College Research Center of Columbia University. Since joining ATD, she has reaffirmed its vision. She has stabilized its finance. She's introduced the widespread promotion of the use of open educational resources. I know something close to Sadie's heart, so that students have free access to the textbooks that are critical for them to have success. They have designed non-cognitive support systems. They've really helped to create what are called guided pathways, so students aren't lost in this sort of cornucopia of choices, but have a clear way to get to a degree. She's also received honorary degree from Miami-Dade College, the largest community college in the United States, and has been cited as a leader by Diverse Issues in Higher Education and by Washington Monthly as one of the most innovative leaders in American higher education today. She's also been a great friend and champion of many of you in this room. Over the years, Karen and ATD have hosted probably 150 to 200 South Africans who've come to DREAM. And in fact, the DREAM conference has been the inspiration for this conference and for DREAM in general and ATD in general, the inspiration for our Siyaphumelela work. ATD through Jan Liddon has provided data coaching for many of the Siyaphumelela grantees. And in short, Karen and ATD have been great leaders, and she's been a visionary for low-income, first-generation underrepresented students, and for the role community colleges and higher education can and must play to ensure student success. I can't wait to hear what she plans to say today and the dialogue I'm sure it will engender. So please join me in welcoming Karen Stout up to the stage.
Well, that was a really wonderful introduction, Bill. Thank you. And it's great to be back at the podium today. I recognize a lot of faces in the room from this morning's workshop and many other faces from our interactions over the last 4 years at DREAM. It really is an honor to be here and to be in South Africa. I want to thank Bill and the Kresge Foundation for your generous support and this opportunity to visit South Africa. And I want to thank Jenny and Alan for your kind invitation and your gentle, though relentless, encouragement to visit South Africa and to participate as a workshop presenter and in this keynote role. I landed yesterday, and so today I'm on the stage all day, and I have to say, I can't wait to be off of the stage because I think the jet lag will settle in, hopefully, after this presentation. Achieving the Dream values this partnership, and it's a partnership that values many of the same goals and holds many of the same values. Bill mentioned I'm just completing my 4th year as president of Achieving the Dream, coming on board at about the same time that this partnership really started to take form and to begin to make progress. And I have learned about the South African university experience through you and your eyes at your participation, through your participation at DREAM. But I've also read some of the site reports from our colleague Jan Liddon. But there's nothing like being here and experiencing this, and just this morning hearing your observations as we worked through the holistic student support design framework that Achieving the Dream has. I learned so much from you. I want to thank many members of our ATD team that are not here. Jan, Carol Lincoln, who many of you know, who behind the scenes supports the partnership internally at ATD and really works hard to put the logistics in place for DREAM. And my holistic student support colleagues, Shauna Davis and Julia Lawton, who helped me prepare for this morning's workshop. So as you know, let me see if I can, the clicker.
No.
As you may know, as some of you know, Achieving the Dream started about 15 years ago as a 27 college, 5-state demonstration project. Sound familiar? And is now an independent national learning network with 277 active in-network colleges in 44 states and the District of Columbia. We also have more than 60 employees and 75 leadership and data coaches and advisors and numerous partners. So we are a fairly large network of colleges, but we are also a network of partners that help us to move this work forward in the United States. So my first challenge for today was really to determine a topic and a title for my remarks. There are so many possible directions that I could have gone in, and Bill mentioned a few of the things that we're doing at Achieving the Dream. And at one point, Carol Lincoln and myself brainstormed like 12 different possible keynote titles, but I landed on this one, Helping All Students Succeed, Insights from the American Community College Experience, with some guidance from Jenny and Alan, and really because it gives me an opportunity to speak to these objectives today. We'll be sharing what brought me personally to this work and what keeps me in this work. That's important because we all have a personal experience and personal story that brings us to this room today, and that keeps us here and keeps our attention to this work in an unwavering, steady way that is absolutely essential. To share lessons from what we've learned in ATD so that you can take the lessons that are working potentially and replicate them in a South African context. But also I'll be talking about some of the failures that led to the successes, especially in the early work of Achieving the Dream, where at one point, because of external evaluation, we were not sure if we would survive after the first 5 years of work when the results were not accelerating at the point that some of our investors thought they should move in. Share lessons about ATD's own experience as a reform network that hopefully will help Sadie and others as you begin to accelerate your work in South Africa to reach more universities and to create maybe not just one network, but micro networks that are supporting the larger network and the larger vision and goals of your work together. And I'm hoping through the Q&A that we at Achieving the Dream might gain an understanding of how we might work together to strengthen what might be next for a collective journey. And most importantly, I'm really excited to learn with you and from you. So a little bit about my journey, and there was a role model, there's a role model of mine in U.S. universities, Freeman Habrowski, who is the president of University of Maryland, Baltimore County. He's been president there for nearly 20 years. And in a leadership workshop, and we're never too old or too accomplished to learn something and to go to a leadership workshop, he asked how many of us in the audience were first-generation college students. And just about everybody in that room, filled with college presidents, raised their hand. And he said, you need to find ways to share your story, your experience, and you need to do it very early with students and often with students. So I thought maybe sharing a little bit about myself and what shaped my life journey would contextualize the passion that I feel for the role of America's community colleges. I am the first member of either side of my family to go directly from high school to college. And my first college graduation, however, was not my own college graduation, it was my father's. So when I was in the 4th grade, I watched him earn his bachelor's degree after 8 years attending part-time at night while he worked as a truck driver, picking up and delivering laundry to restaurants on a route that went through Baltimore City. He was a father of 3, a proud Marine, who was able to attend college through the country's GI Bill benefits. You know, one of the first real powerful federal programs in the United States that opened up access and opportunity. I think he attended college, though. He attended college at the time as much for earning a degree and what he thought might be the promise of a degree, as he also went because of the additional dollars that came in each month and put food on the table. So the GI Bill covered tuition, and the more you attended and the more credits you enrolled for, the more your monthly stipend was. So some of my earliest memories as a child were watching my parents argue at the kitchen table about how many credits he would register for each semester. Because my mom knew that the more credits he registered for, the more additional income would come into the family. And of course, now being in this work, I also understand it meant that he would reach his goal faster. The faster his pathway toward a new career would be a faster way toward a life-sustaining wage. Jump forward a couple of years, and I went to college on an athletic scholarship. Now, as a sidebar, I do want to mention, and I watched some of the highlights of the South African Women's World Cup team in their game against Germany, where Germany took an early 4-0 lead, and the grit and passion of the South African women was just amazing. So I understand how competition can shape the grit and resilience of someone. Field hockey was my sport, and that's what took me to competitions around the world. I was one of the first 2 women to attend the University of Delaware on an athletic scholarship. I call myself a Title IX baby, and Title IX was a piece of legislation in the United States that required universities to begin to afford female athletes the same opportunities as male athletes, and that included scholarship support. That's what got me to the university. In my first job out of college, I made more money than my father did. And that's even after he achieved his bachelor's degree and started a career. So you can begin to see some of the elements of the transformational power of education and the generational ripple effect of that on me personally. And some of the systemic policies and supports at the federal level that were absolutely essential for my father's access to higher education, for my access to higher education, the GI Bill, and Title IX. It was only a few years into my presidency at Montgomery County Community College that I realized that I was a first-generation student. I've never really understood the language, and I began to understand that, boy, I entered college with a lot of at-promise factors, not at-risk factors, but at-promise factors. And we started to look at some of those this morning, those under-the-iceberg kind of factors. I found my energy as a leader in the community college by surrounding myself with our students and learning from them about what we needed to do to change their conditions. And I think that passion really was because I suddenly realized there were people along the way and systems and policies and practices and faculty members and others who surrounded me with supports that I really didn't understand that were absolutely essential for my success. I remember a student telling me in one of our forums where we were breaking down data and then presenting it to students, because we really felt that students needed to understand where the achievement gaps were along their own journey as they came into Montgomery County Community College. a group of about 50 student leaders, and I had my slides and my data, and you'll see my slides and my data today, and I'm very serious about the data, and I'm serious about the message, and I'm addressing the students, and a student stops me and says, Dr. Stout, I have a question and I have an observation. So I paused, and she said, I love your slides. I understand the data, and I can see myself in the data. She said, but the slides are wrong. You're measuring retention from fall to fall, and you're showing the progression from fall to fall. She said, for me, retention is not fall to fall. For me, retention is tomorrow. And then she went on to tell a story about how she rationed her gas so that she could get to class based on each week on a Sunday night, based on what she saw as the homework assignments in the syllabi from the faculty members, and she decided which classes she would go to and which classes she would skip based on how much gas money she had that week. She was a nursing student, so she was taking big risks when she decided which classes to go to and which classes not to go to. And that's when it really hit me that collecting big data and being proactive and predictive and trying to support students before it becomes too late. She was not going to class not because she wasn't interested in class. She was making strategic decisions herself about when to go and when not to go. So student stories have always inspired me. They're always at the center of the work at Achieving the Dream, and they were when I was a leader of a college. And Janae, some of you heard Janae's story this morning. Our work at Achieving the Dream, touches students in ways that I can't always see because I'm not on a campus anymore, but that I know. And Janae's story is very powerful. My journey into community colleges, I've been in community colleges 35 years, was accidental, and the story will tell you more about me and my mother. You see, we are relentless and determined. So I applied 3 times for my first community college position and was rejected all 3 times. My mom found the job advertisements in the local paper, and she clipped it out 3 different times. Sent it to me each time thinking I was perfect for the job, plus she wanted me home. I would apply and get the same rejection letter. The problem was that I did not meet the minimum qualifications for the position as it was posted. It required 3 years in higher education. But one Thursday evening, the hiring manager called and asked if I was still interested in the position and invited me to meet with the search committee the next morning. I did say yes to that. I could have said no, but it was the best yes I ever said. By that Friday evening, I left with the job offer, and I've never left community colleges, and they've never left me. So through the years, and I know South Africa does not have a similar form of higher education, but the power of community colleges in America and this local-based institution allows families to have multiple intersections with one college. My mom ended up going back to the community college as an adult student, seeking upskilling classes so she could secure her first job. When I went to college, she decided to go to work, and she became a bookkeeper based on taking 2 accounting classes at the local community college. My dad ended up getting a master's in business administration and teaching at the local community college as an adjunct faculty member. My nephew has attended the same local community college as a recent transfer student. And another nephew has attended the same community college as what we call an early college high school student as he pursues his dream of going to medical school. I moved on from my first community college position to 3 other community colleges as an administrator, faculty member, even a field hockey coach. And I ended up taking classes at that same community college to fill in my undergraduate record to enter graduate school. My mom passed away in January, and I've established an endowed scholarship fund in her honor to keep the cycle of our family connections in place at that same community college. So I think I have found what I call my red thread. The red thread is really what keeps you going. And Marcus Buckingham writes about the red thread. He's an author that believes in strengths-based asset growth mindset kind of work, which we talked about this morning, that if only 20% of what you do hits your red thread, then you have joy and purpose with your work. If you can't get to that 20% point, then you have to think differently about, your career, what you're doing. So this vocation anchors me and gives me a constant sense of purpose in a sector that is gaining status and has strong expectations in America. So I have to admit that coming here and speaking about this work of achieving the dream and what we're learning is a little bit intimidating. So we talk a lot about cultural competency inside achieving the dream as one of the core competencies we hire to. Yet I stand here, admittedly, with very little cultural competence about South Africa. So I hope you'll work with me through these remarks and support my own learning. What I do know is that our collective work together, and even our work in parallel in different countries, is urgent for the future health of our students, our communities, and our countries. After all, it is the data around inequality, this elusive and necessary moonshot, as this work is now being called in the United States, that bring us together. Both of our countries have a geography of poverty. Now, I was struck, and Bill gave me a reading list before I came to South Africa, and on the reading list is a short primer about the history of South Africa, dinosaurs, democracy, and diamonds. But there's a poverty map from 2011 in that book that really just struck me, with the multiple deprivation of households in South Africa by income, education, and health, which we don't necessarily track that same way in America. But we do have what's called an equality of opportunity map that our colleges use now in order to delineate by zip code the economic inequalities of the communities that we serve. And I was struck, too, by our parallel histories of racism. I visited the Apartheid Museum yesterday afternoon and didn't have enough time. I was there for 4 hours and really needed even more time. I read Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime, and I realized, though, that even though there are parallel histories, he says this: in America, you had the forced removal of the native onto reservations coupled with slavery, followed by segregation. But imagine all three of those things happening to the same group of people at the same time. And that really struck me. And then there's the warning from Francis Wilson's book that underscores the urgency facing both countries. That failure of the educational system to prepare for the 21st century jobs contains seeds of a major political or social catastrophe. And I would add to that it's failure of the system to equitably prepare citizens for 21st century jobs. That will be catastrophe. And the data that Jenny showed really, I think, brings that home for South Africa. So both countries have made amazing strides around student success and in reducing poverty and in bridging racial divides, but we still have much more work to do. So I want to move to some of the challenges in America and then talk to achieving the dream and the lessons learned. So community colleges are very unique, and I wish there were a way that we could bring community colleges and at least some part of our work to South Africa. It seems like it's such a missing part of the higher education framework in South Africa. We're a hybrid where we sit between K through 12 and the university. We are somewhat like technical colleges in South Africa, but not really. But many of the students that don't enter your universities would end up at an American community college or a version of a community college, and they're swirling into our community colleges. And so we were designed specifically to provide higher education opportunity and social mobility for less advantaged students. I mean, that is our foundational mission. We were founded in the 1950s and 60s in America. At some point, we were opening up across the country at a rate of 1 college per week. Veterans, adults, women returning to the workforce, workers that were displaced, they were flocking to America's community colleges. And so this quote captures what is a very unique challenge, and a challenge that is inherent in our mission. We have many challenges before us in America around inequality. And these slides may look familiar to you in some respects. We can't ignore the historical legacy of inequality in the US and the severe disadvantages many of our students have had to overcome just to step foot onto our campuses. So this is a slide showing findings from a recent study by Georgetown University's Center on Education and the Workforce. And the disparities in educational attainment are clear, and they appear in our students' lives well before they reach community colleges. High socioeconomic status students with below median math scores still have a higher educational attainment in both the 2-year and 4-year settings compared to low socioeconomic status students with above median math scores. And less than 1 in 10 low student economic status, socioeconomic status students coming to us completes an associate degree if their math scores upon admission are below the national median. Only 1 in 10. So another gap. Gaps are unmistakable when you disaggregate national statistics by race and ethnicity. So the same center, similar study, looks at gaps in educational attainment by African American, Hispanic, and Latinx students, especially those with below median math scores. And you can begin to look at this and see that if we do not address these gaps, we will face economic and social catastrophe in the United States, where we have significantly shifting demographics. In the next 10 years, we will be a minority-majority country. And many of our colleges, in fact, the cohort that just came into Achieving the Dream, the 17 colleges that just came into Achieving the Dream, their student profile, 40% of the students in the new cohort, 200,000 students coming into our new cohort, 17 colleges. 40% are Hispanic Latinx, 38% African American. So it's the first time we're seeing our cohort demographics begin to represent what will be, in 5 to 10 years, the demographics of the country. Meanwhile, public funding in the United States is at pre-recession levels. We have not recovered from the 2008 recession. There's very little public investment in higher education now. It continues to decline. There's only 2 states in the United States that have more per student public funding than they did in 2008. So states are disinvesting, the federal government's disinvesting, and the hardest hit students are the community college students. And you can see we are enrolling more and more low-income students. So for America's community colleges, the challenges before us are immense. We're being asked to rebuild our communities, to do more with less, to serve more low-income and middle-class students, and basically to help our country recapture our lead in higher education. It's a daunting it's a daunting task. But it's our Achieving the Dream colleges that are working really hard in this environment and still improving student success. So for Achieving the Dream, this is our why. This work, we believe, is urgent, and the future of our country is dependent on our success as a national nonprofit. It requires that we strengthen our communities by relentlessly addressing systemic inequities and increasing social and economic mobility. And you saw how large our network is. Our collective impact, we're not just looking at degrees, we are looking at post-secondary credentials that lead to labor market value for the student and for the communities. So that we've moved as a network, and Jenny started to point to this, I think, in her comments earlier, for completion to be more of a progress metric than the end metric, knowing that there's more work to do when students gain their credential. That includes placing them into employment that has labor market value and sustainability. Our colleges rely on us. Amarillo College's president, there would not be a success story at Amarillo without Achieving the Dream. So what have we learned from 15 years in this work? I'm going to start with the big picture and then drill a little bit into it. So we've learned that our most successful colleges, the ones that are accelerating student success gains, have 4 characteristics or 4 commitments. The first is that they work on building solid, strong fundamentals, strong capacities. And they understand that building capacity is enduring. You don't come in, work on capacity building, build capacity after 5 years and say, now our institution has these capacities to really design to student success. We know leaders change, leadership team members change, governance changes, funding changes, so the fundamentals and the attention is cyclical and enduring. Our successful colleges are organizing their work around a framework. So this morning we talked about holistic student support design as a potential framework for organizing work. But having a framework that everyone in your university understands, you can speak to, that builds a compelling cause, that each of you personally can see where your work fits, is absolutely essential to setting conditions for change. The third is that this work is contextualized, so the work will look different from university to university based on your own context, and that you have, as a university, found your own lever or theory of change to move the needle within your university. And I'll talk about how this looks at different colleges within the ATD network. And the last is that you understand that this work requires patience and a sense of urgency at the same time. Because the slide that Jenny showed had data back from 2006. And we know that this work takes time. And that can be frustrating. So I want to go a little bit deeper into the fundamentals piece. So building fundamentals. ATD believes that these 7 conditions or fundamentals need to be strong and in place to support a student success-focused culture. This work is about changing the culture of your organizations. These are the 7 capacities that we've developed based on what we have learned about what change looks like on the ground with our colleges. Now, let me go a little bit deeper. Frameworks. This is the capacity, the capacities, and then one possible framework to organize. So I talked about colleges needing capacities, a framework. This framework that's wrapped around the capacities is called the Guided Pathways Framework. This was built based on a lot of learning from Achieving the Dream, but basically that you work to clarify the pathways for students, you work to get students on a pathway, you build supports to keep them on the pathway, and then you ensure that students are learning. It's just one framework. There are many frameworks. This morning was the Holistic Student Support Framework. To me, it's not which framework you pick that matters. It's about your college, your university, understanding what that framework means for you in your context. The lever. I talked about the lever. Amarillo, their lever was their president saying, we're going to alleviate poverty. No excuses. We're going to take on our student success work with a theory of change being that we're going to take on poverty. And you can see from this slide, Amarillo's 3-year graduation rate skyrocketing at the point that they took on the culture of caring. And I talked about this morning, and you can see the graphic next to it shows how many students were accessing supports through their advocacy and resource center, which was their big move. So I like to talk about the lever being, what is your big move? You're going to make a lot of moves in this work, but what is your big move? And is it scalable? Is it touching as many students as it possibly can? That's that lever. What's your big move? Columbus State Community College, a winner recently of our Leah Meyer Alston Award. Their big move was, and you see their graduation rates going up as well. Their big move was this belief that multiple interventions for the most at-promise students would work. And they kept experimenting. What are the multiple interventions that are required? We know it's not one intervention. We know it's a set of bundled interventions. That was their big move at the point that they said, aha, we're looking for the magic bullet by looking for one. It's not one, it's a bundle. It's a bundle. 8 of the 10 Aspen Prize winners, Aspen Prize finalists that Bill talked about in his opening remarks, are Achieving the Dream colleges, and that's not an accident. It's because these colleges have worked on the fundamentals, a framework, they've used a lever, they've been patient with urgency. So as I look up here and I look at some of the Achieving the Dream colleges, Pierce College, their big move, they shared all student success data and on an individual faculty basis, widely with other faculty. So it was all open. So as a faculty member, you could look at a colleague in your department, you could look at your student success data, and you could look at their student success data. At first, chaos. But then faculty started to find each other, and they started to do what is really at the heart of this work. They started to ask calls to wonder questions. Why? You're keeping students in your math class longer than I am. Your students are starting to drop at 2/3 of the point of the course. I'm losing them at the front end. So faculty start to redesign. Simple intervention. A faculty member asked a couple of her students, I've been looking at my data and I see, and she pulled a small focus group, she saw that students who had children were dropping her class at an alarming rate. First level math class. She brought a bunch of those students together after class, met the same demographic characteristics, had a small focus group, and the mostly women said to her, you give homework all throughout the week. I can't do my homework during the week and care for my family. Small change. She moved all of her homework to the weekends. Suddenly, her success rates in her course went way up. Small changes, but using data. And there are other examples of big moves on this list. So this is from the Community College Research Center, and it just, I think, magnifies the idea of urgency and patience. And this outlines a typical kind of trajectory of the student success work within a college. Now, they're studying the work of guided pathways, but it's very similar to a lot of the Achieving the Dream work. A lot of the Achieving the Dream colleges are in this subset that they studied. But basically, 6 years, 2 years to lay the groundwork, 3 years to do the redesign work, much of it that we talked about this morning. You can't do it in a day, you can't do it in one workshop. 3 years to do the redesign, and another year to implement at scale, and a final year to really look at how you're going to set up systems for ongoing improvement, and then you start again. The work's unending. So setting expectations as a leader is really important with this when you move into the student success work, because we're seeing a lot of our colleges give up when they don't see immediate returns. They say, we're all into this Achieving the Dream work. Now, by magic, all of a sudden, we're supposed to see the results go up. It won't work that way. So setting expectations, very important. So back to the capacities, a couple of things that we've learned along the way. Now, we use an instrument called ICAT, the Institutional Capacity Assessment Framework. We've been experimenting with ICAT in South Africa. We know we have a lot of contextualization to do with ICAT to make this meaningful. But we do know that some of the South African universities are very interested in understanding your own capacity building. Where do you rate with your capacity building? So in America, we've administered ICAT to 200 colleges. We have 33,000 responses. And this is the aggregated data from our network. There's a scale of 1 to 4 that respondents rank their capacities against their different dimensions, and they roll up into these 7 capacities. So you see the ratings for all the institutions in ATD, and then our leading winning institutions. You can see there's a difference in the capacity ratings for the colleges that have seen the strongest results. What's interesting here are the three capacities that are the lowest ranked. And I visited colleges all across America, and all of these colleges end up with the same 3 capacities being the capacities that they need the most support with. Data and technology, equity, and teaching and learning. So just to explore a little bit, and this gets a little bit dense, and I'm going to move through this pretty quickly. In ICAT, we have a number of questions in each of the categories. So in the teaching and learning category of questions, we have questions that are sort of outside of the teaching and learning classroom, so around the enabling conditions for teaching and learning. And then we have questions for inside. Early in our work with Achieving the Dream, we pretty much started the work around the margins, and we did not involve teaching faculty in the reform work. Now, 15 years in, we're finding this is a fundamental first step. Faculty are our scalers. They touch all of our students. For about the first 5 to 7 years in the Achieving the Dream work, faculty were not that deeply engaged, and we were ignoring the group within our institutions that needed to be at the table first and very deeply. That's one of the first biggest lessons from this Achieving the Dream work. And as you look at these results, and I'm going to go to the last where we're the weakest. So we are weakest in our institutions in supporting faculty. Our faculty don't have strong professional development programs. Faculty come to America's community colleges with discipline knowledge, but they don't necessarily know about pedagogy. And we've ignored that in our colleges. And now many of our Achieving the Dream colleges are designing professional development supports for faculty that are mandatory, that are deep in pedagogy, and are beginning to show some real results. Now, in America's community colleges, faculty, and I mentioned this morning, are not evaluated based on research. They're evaluated based on teaching. They're hired based on teaching. They're evaluated based on teaching. If they do research, that's great, and it counts in their portfolio for tenure. But usually they're doing applied research about about student learning, not other types of research. So that's a fundamental difference that I just want to acknowledge. Do faculty update their instructional practice based on acquired professional development? So stale, stagnant updating of courses and pedagogy, something we are really working now with our colleges on. Are data regularly used to improve educational practice and instruction? See how low these ratings are. Some really low-hanging fruit here for our work. Do professional development activities support adjunct faculty participation? Adjunct faculty in America's community colleges are part-time faculty. They teach 60% of the sections in our colleges. Very few of our colleges work to create strong working conditions and professional development for adjunct faculty. So we're doing a lot now around those areas in the teaching and learning area. Let me jump to equity. And I'm going to go back to equity at the end of the presentation, so I'm going to do this fairly quickly. Across the board, low capacity in the equity area. But I would just want to mention a couple of these. Do faculty and are faculty and staff prepared to work with a diverse student population? Are equity concepts embedded in co-curricular activities? Has the college defined metrics to promote and enhance equity? And first of all, and I'll talk about this again in a couple of minutes, but I just want to say that many of our colleges are struggling with even putting equity into the conversation. It can be a very difficult conversation, even under the best conditions of discourse within your community and your country. But it's become almost paralyzing for some of our colleges to have these conversations, given the current context in America. And I'm not going to say a whole lot more about that. I mean, I think that our colleges have been journeying from focusing on diversity to focusing on inclusion and creating a sense of belonging to now working with equity. But some of our colleges can't get to equity. And I'm not sure about the conditions in South Africa to make the analogous case, and maybe we can talk about that in the Q&A. What's interesting here is that we as an organization are known in the United States for our work with data and disaggregating data. But in the equity area, is disaggregated student data used to address achievement gaps? That's the lowest ranked of the equity capacity questions. So our colleges are disaggregating data, but they're not using it. They're staring at it. So it's good to have it, but how do you make it actionable? And then in data and technology, where the capacities are very, very low, even with all of our work, our colleges are struggling with understanding the student experience with their data, connecting it. They're struggling with their data systems. The data systems don't talk to each other. They're struggling with the data warehouse, just the architecture, the internal architecture. They're struggling with IT professionals, technology professionals who are not in sync with institutional research professionals. They're struggling with faculty. When you share the data, the faculty argue with the data and the integrity of the data. Is the data clean data? And so we know in Achieving the Dream College has moved into year 3 or 4 of their work when the faculty stops fighting with the data and owns their own story. I see some people shaking their heads. You're probably maybe still having some of that fight. And it seems like every time we introduce new data concepts and show data in new ways, we have to start all over again with demonstrating the quality of the data and getting past the struggle and the fight with the data. So I love this slide because it comes from a book that David McCullough wrote about the Wright brothers. And Wilbur Wright and his brother invented the flying machine based on many, many, many hours of observing birds flying. And they prototyped the machine based on observing the way birds fly. Lesson, to put the student experience at the middle of the table. How often do we intentionally sit, look at the data, observe student patterns, watch, do focus groups, look qualitatively at the student experience, and then design our institutions around the student experience. Using that observation of the student experience to help prototype the design of our organizations. So understanding the student voice is an important lesson from the Achieving the Dream work. Metrics, aligning metrics. For years, we argued in America about what metrics mattered as we looked at the student success journey collectively in an aggregate way. We have finally rested on some common definition of what the metrics should be, so that we're not arguing from college to college. Instead, based on what we've learned, what's been evidence-based, there are some early metrics that we know are important for student success. So the number of college credits that a student completes in their first semester and first year obviously correlates to student success. What's amazing when we ask our colleges to look at this data is the number of students in our new cohort. 20% of the students in the first semester of our new cohort of colleges, 20% of the students earn 0 college credits in their first semester. 0. That says a lot. Very few end up being retained to the next semester, but some do. But they're eating up their federal financial aid along the way. They only have a certain amount of time that federal financial aid will support their work. We know that students that complete college-level math and English in their first year are more likely to complete. So working to put those supports in place faster is really important. And then additional metrics that we've added past the early momentum metrics, and these are really important. And I want to look at the new metrics around cost and the new metrics around post-college outcomes. So we, as a community college sector, have measured our success by completion and transfer out rates and employment rates, sort of, if we could get the data. Now we're encouraging our colleges to look at completion by not just associate degree and transfer out, but do the students that come to the community college desiring a bachelor's degree. So 80% of the students that enter America's community colleges desire a bachelor's degree. That's what they say their intent is when they register for classes. 80%. 6 years later, only 14% earn a bachelor's degree. So closing that gap between intent and completion and helping community colleges to own bachelor's degree completion is a big agenda for us in the United States. And then other lessons. Talked about the fundamentals, but within those fundamentals, leadership matters. Colleges that have had long-serving presidents seem to be able to turn the flywheel and keep the results going. Patience and urgency. Changes in leadership are disruptive. It almost goes back to square one when there's a change in leadership. And that means also our boards of trustees, that's our governing groups on our college campuses, state policy. If those leaders stay in place, they stay the course, we have more opportunity to let these interventions and these strategies for redesign kind of build. That state context matters, that our interventions need to be targeted and universal. I'll speak to that in a little bit. That our faculty and staff experience is as fragmented as a student experience. Earlier today, you saw this typical student experience slide, some of you that were in the workshop. Think about the typical faculty or staff experience when you're onboarded into your university. Is there a clear pathway for you? Your success is as important as student success. So thinking about those pathways in addition to student pathways is very important. So insights now from Achieving the Dream as an intermediary and what that's meant, what this journey has meant for Achieving the Dream. So the student success work in America has been evolving, and you probably could draw a similar arc of the movement here in South Africa. The first phase of the work was really focused on students completing an associate degree. And we have about a third of our community colleges that are in that first phase of work. The second phase is really focused on our students seeing economic gains from their experience with the community college. So moving from completion to student return on investment. Can we measure whether this experience had a meaningful difference on a student's economic welfare? And the third phase, and some of our colleges have started moving to the student economic gains piece. They're looking at data, labor market value of degrees, matching their programs with the requirements of the local economic community's needs. The third phase is community well-being. And that is, because our organizations exist in a community, what is the ripple effect on our community? Is the community healthier because we're here? Is there a stronger workforce because we're here? Are we more competitive as a region because the college is here? And how can we begin to measure that and make that tangible and connect it to the work we're doing around student completion? So ROI from a community perspective. And you can see if you can get to that third phase, you can begin to get additional investment from outside public support. That's where the philanthropic support can begin to kick in, because you can begin to demonstrate in a real tangible way the economic power of your colleges. We also know that our colleges come into this work in varying stages of readiness, capability, and maturity of practice. So if I were to ask each of the universities represented here, how ready are you for this work? Your strengths will be different. And we, as an organization, when we first started, we looked at every college coming into this work as having the same degree of readiness. And we weren't ready to support the varying needs of our colleges with capacity building. We were asking our colleges to adjust their models to support students, but Achieving the Dream was not adjusting its model to support our organizations. So as we've been going through our own reinvention as a nonprofit and an intermediary for this work, I always go back recently to this S-curve, and it comes from a book called Illuminate by Nancy Duarte and Patty Sanchez. And the book is an excellent book, and it's really a book for leaders to do storytelling about your where you are in a certain change part of your work. I look at it as kind of a framework for the work of an organization, and it sets the stage for the fact that you have to be continually evolving. So think about your university on this S-curve. I can think about, you could put Sadie on this S-curve. I'll put Achieving the Dream on this S-curve. And Achieving the Dream early in our, when we were founded, the dreaming stage, the start change stage, our first kind of 5 years together as an organization, we went to the maturity stage pretty quickly, and we stopped. We stopped thinking about our work with our colleges and changing it. We didn't start redreaming for the next S-curve until our work as an intermediary had started to get, and I don't know, had started to get on the decline. So if you're in an organization that gets past maturity and gets into decline, without starting the redreaming of the next part of your S-curve, you really are an organization in trouble. So, fortunately, in the last 5 years, we were able to accelerate our redreaming stage, and we built a new model. A new model down here. Now I'd say with our new model, we're in this growth stage, and I'm a cyclist, so we're on our way to the top of the hill in the steepest part of the climb. And we're hoping that as an organization, we have really good bike shoes and bike clips and a carbon bicycle that's nice and light so that we can keep climbing to get to the mature stage. But as an organization, we are working here in doing some things that are really important for our colleges. So we have customized our model. So we are meeting colleges where they come in. So we have ICAT. We understand what capacity building needs our colleges have. We design supports based on where our colleges are. We're building out new services for our colleges. So Holistic Student Supports, which I spoke to this morning, is a new service line that many of our colleges are moving into. So we're building new products and services, and it sounds very business-oriented, but what we've had to do is figure out a way to sustain our work, continue to help our colleges improve outcomes, but not use a one-size-fits-all model. So customization of our supports has become very important. And we're already at this redreaming stage, and the Kresge Foundation was very helpful in helping us to do part of this redreaming. We recently merged with another nonprofit that works with early college opportunities for our most vulnerable 16 to 24-year-olds so that we can help our community colleges connect in a stronger way with early college high school models. And that will be part of the next phase of the work of Achieving the Dream. So these principles really guide our work as an intermediary moving forward. We are redesigning around what our colleges needs. We are looking at our competitors. So we were the only reform network in America 15 years ago. Now there are many, and the movement has spread not just to community colleges, but across all sectors of higher education. So we were very much a leader, and now we are in with a group of reform-minded organizations trying to make sure that we keep our signature assets in place. Partnerships for us are really important. Who do we work with as a partner? Who do we decide not to? There are less than optimal partners that can hamper your work, and being able to strategically vet those partners is important. We have a new model for our own financial sustainability. When I got to Achieving the Dream, 60% of our budget was from philanthropy, 40% from other, primarily from our colleges. Now 60% of our revenues from our colleges, 40% is from philanthropy. So we're less reliant on philanthropy, and we're strategic about how we're using philanthropy, and we're using philanthropy on what we call innovation, research. It's our research and design arm. We're looking for philanthropy to help us test new ideas with our colleges so that we can bring new thinking and new resources and supports to our colleges. And inside ATD, we understand that recruiting and retaining talent is really important. So those are kind of the things that we're working on internally as an organization around these four principles. And you know how we feel about the power of fundamentals. Relationships for our colleges are important. Peer networked learning is essential. We have the large network, but we have micro networks within the large network. We serve 34 tribal colleges and universities as part of our big network, but they also have a learning network. We have 39 colleges using open education resources. They're part of our large network, but they're their own learning network. We have about 11 colleges deeply engaged in holistic student supports. They're part of the big network. They have their own learning network too. Our coaches who are deployed to our colleges have a learning network. So we're really trying to pull all of those networks strategically together. I want to just speak about equity because we have renewed and revised our perspective as an organization about equity. These are members of the Achieving the Dream team wearing their equity t-shirts, and they really are responsible for energizing Achieving the Dream's vision around equity. Early on, we helped colleges diagnose their gaps with the data, but we did not have a philosophy about what we as an organization meant about equity. And as a result, as our colleges did more and more interventions, they actually were creating interventions that were not scalable, and in many cases, were moving the needle on completion up, but were widening the achievement gap. So that's 5 years ago, what I was seeing in the work in Achieving the Dream. That was disturbing, So we developed a new equity statement. There's 3 slides here. I think they're really important because they really put a stake in the ground about what Achieving the Dream is about. Student access and success in higher education continues to be impacted by the effects of structural racism and systemic poverty. So we can't ignore the ecosystem that we are part of. Achievement gaps among student groups reflect structural inequities that are often the result of historic and systemic social injustices. So really important for a national nonprofit to step out and say that and be that explicit, because our colleges were struggling with their own definitions of equity, and we had to put something out that they could model from, a starting point. And this was in 2016 and was a little bit controversial with our colleges in some parts of the United States. Urban, rural, big divide. It goes on. Equity is grounded in the principle of fairness. In higher education, equity refers to ensuring that each student receives what they need to be successful through the intentional design of the college experience. That's what we talked about this morning, that intentional design of the college experience. So not that boutique interventions aren't important, but we're talking more about structural interventions, changing policies and systems, changing the way that we place students into college classes, because we know that the way that we place students in college classes is structurally unfair. Achieving the Dream expects colleges to dismantle the barriers. So we set out that expectation. If you're going to be in Achieving the Dream, we expect you to be looking at student outcomes in an equitable way. We expect you to be championing student outcomes in an equitable way. Colleges must routinely scrutinize structural barriers to equity and invest in equity-minded policies, practices, and behaviors that lead to student success for all students. When Achieving the Dream was first founded, we said, we are an organization helping colleges to improve success for low-income students and students of color. Very explicitly stated. We've changed our language a bit. All students, but still looking to disaggregate and to look at the disparities in achievement by subgroups of students. And when you do that, you do see that low-income students and students of color continue to have the largest gaps. But it's an important change to the language we're using. Internally, we organize by coach, innovate, connect. I'm not going to go into much detail here, just to say this is an organizing principle inside ATD. We deploy coaches. We put them inside our institutions. They help our institutions create a habit around keeping student success at the forefront of their work. We have peer learning opportunities. You've attended DREAM, but we also have a number of learning events around data, around equity, around holistic student supports, and recently around teaching and learning. And we're working on innovate, new ideas from our R&D work, open education resources being one of those examples. And we're attending to the base of the work inside ATD, our core, our own IT infrastructure, HR, finance, which is really important. So in the S-curve and going up the hill, these are the numbers of colleges we've served cumulatively since 2017. So we have in-network, and now we have a lot of work where out-of-network colleges can come in. So as you think about expanding this work in South Africa, from in-network, in Sadie, to outside, and figuring out how you're going to bring the whole country, build engagement for the entire country. There's some, we've been able to expand our footprint. And our in-network colleges, this is kind of ATD lingo, but you can see the diversification of the way they work with ATD. Some of them are in holistic student support, some teaching and learning, some just are getting coaching, some are doing our new gateway to college work, that's the K through 12 work. And those that are in network are the tribal colleges, and then the 65 are the more traditional colleges. But what's interesting then is when you go to out of network, other colleges that are not in Achieving the Dream are buying supports from Achieving the Dream for holistic student supports, for the K through 12 work that we're doing, and for teaching and learning. So we've really expanded, and part of that is out of organizational sustainability. You know, ATD has a lot more work ahead of it. We're serving about 1/3 of America's community colleges. We want to reach all 1,200. The colleges we're reaching now, in some respects, are our most, they're the most agile for change. They're also, in some cases, the most resourced. And the colleges we're not reaching are the least resourced colleges, serving the most in-need students. And so figuring out how to develop a sustaining business model that will help us to get supports at an affordable price for the colleges that need us the most is kind of the next horizon for our work as an intermediary. So if we succeed, we think community colleges succeed and the country succeeds. So, you know, students will graduate faster. I mean, all of these things will happen if ATD succeeds, and all of these things are urgent and essential for our country. I want to end where I started, and this is with a student voice. And this quote is a small part of Amit's poem, and he read this at Achieving the Dream. We have a Dream Scholars program at Achieving the Dream, and we open all of our plenary sessions with student stories, and they tell their stories in the form of poetry, and they use the model Where I Am to help, and we provide supports and coaching for the students throughout their experience at Dream. So I'm going to read Amit's poem, and hopefully this will inspire you as much as it inspired everybody in the audience at Dream. There are no cardinal directions to tell where I am from. I am from everywhere. I am from Sudan, Chad, France, the United States, and a little city called Utica, New York. I am from Mohawk Valley Community College, where champions like me attend. I am from Masalit, English and Braille. Masalit is my native language. It's not written or read, especially in Braille. I am making history, as I say at the moment, I am making history at this moment when I say Talam. This translates to education in English. It is historical because it is the first time a Masalit word has ever been written, read, and recorded in Braille. In this moment, I am from pride. I am from farm animal smells, rice and spice, unbearable temperatures in the Chad refugee camp. I am from procrastination, disorganization, an open mind, open heart, and open eyes. I am from war, but I am also from love. I am from dreaming big and learning that humans can evolve from their failures. I am from education is the key that unlocks the door to success and the understanding that humans make mistakes. I was once the little boy that was told he could not receive an education because he was blind. I am from closed school doors, bullies hitting and running, inaccessibility, and that overwhelming feeling of being lost. I am from Chad, where I had to memorize everything because there was not a way for a blind person to read or write. I am from the United States, where now I can read, speak, and write in English. I am from Mohawk Valley Community College, where I participate in campus activities. I am a member of the Student Leadership Academy. I am a member of Lambda Beta Chapter National Honor Society. I am active in local and state government and interned at the local courthouse. I am a person who has evolved from life's lessons, injustice, and inequality. I am the person who once had no sense of direction, but now I know where I'm going and where I want to be. I am from getting into law school and helping others with my knowledge. I am from studying public policy. I am from believing that one must take actions if they want to see change. I am the person who does not need cardinal directions to get me there. As the cartographer of my own life, I am guided by the fact that no obstacle is too big to overcome. This is why we do this work. There are millions of students in your universities and many, many millions more that want the opportunity to be in your universities, to be a Mott. And I want to just say thank you and good luck with this work as you move forward. It's bold work, but it's absolutely essential and urgent work. So thank you.
So we have about 10 minutes for questions, and then we go to a break. I don't know if anyone is thinking about a question. I have a question actually for you, Karen. What do you think is the single biggest challenge to community colleges or community college students today in the United States?
The single biggest challenge.
Yeah, if you had to pick one that was the big one.
So there are so many. I will look at what I would call the first generation college student challenge, the challenge that we still have so many students in our communities that do not know about community colleges, about how to enter community colleges, that don't have guidance, and that when they do enter our colleges, we don't have the supports in place to help those students. There's this I call it the new access agenda. You know, we've been focused so much in achieving the dream work on completion that we are, in some respects, forgetting those students in our communities, no matter their age, adults, opportunity youth, students who fall through the cracks, they don't finish high school, they don't go on to college, they're not in the military, they're not employed, they're in our communities needing our supports. And reaching those students, I think, is one of the fundamental, upcoming challenges for America's community colleges.
Do we have any questions? Well, let me ask another one. Oh, Jenny.
Yes, and I just wondered what approach you have used in thinking about that teaching and learning bit.
So our founding 5 principles around the redesign did not touch at all teaching and learning. So the ICAT wheel, the 7 fundamentals that we put in place in 2016, called out teaching and learning explicitly as one of the capacities. So that was the first step, I think, where we realized that some of our most mature colleges that came into the network in 2006, 10 years later, were still doing the work, and they had not moved the needle very rapidly. And when we were doing site visits, in many cases, our coaches were never having conversations with the faculty about where they saw students struggling. And that was a big gap. And so we changed the model to make sure that faculty were at the table at the very beginning. So now 3 years into looking at the ICAT data, and we see that it's really around faculty supports, where we have not, as a sector, organized and mobilized to support faculty to be successful, to help students, to help understand the student lived experience in the classroom. That's where we started the conversation with faculty. That is, do you know what the student's lived experience is? The students in front of you every day. Do you understand their journeys into your classroom? And do you know how successful they are inside your classroom? And then do you know, are they successful in the next course they go into? Are they successful in the paired course? A lot of times courses are, economics 1, economics 2, micro, macro, accounting 1 and 2, and very often faculty were not talking to one another about whether students were successfully journeying from one course into the next. That kind of engagement of faculty with their data and understanding the student journey, that's where we are now, and we're trying to put supports into place using our hypothesis in building out a teaching and learning strategy for our colleges is that if colleges invest in what we call, and we have pockets of these in America in our colleges, centers for teaching and learning. You may have something similar to that in some of your universities. These are typically centers we invest in, but we don't connect the work to the student success work. We connect it to something else. But helping colleges build out capacities to support faculty development and to make it more cohesive and intentional. It would almost be like taking the holistic student support workshop that some of you went through this morning and thinking about putting faculty at the center of the table. What would the experience need to be for faculty to be successful in helping students to be successful? Are we designing supports and systems to do that? Are faculty hired in cohesive ways that tie to the student success agenda? Are they evaluated in ways that tie to the student success agenda? I know that would be a major cultural shift for the universities, but is there an element to that? Is professional development designed not just for the individual faculty member to excel and be promoted, but for the students to see success? So we're looking at changing a lot of those internal systems within our colleges to support faculty, but to support faculty through the student success lens. So there is some of our thinking on this. It's early thinking. If you go to the Achieving the Dream website, I did a lecture at NC State University in November called Centering Teaching and Learning in the Student Success Agenda and the urgency of bringing faculty voices into this reform work. And it does talk about a couple of our assumptions about building out that work.
Could you say your name and also your institution?
Okay, my name is Letitia Permel from the University of the Western Cape. Please forgive me if this is a mistake on my part, but something that seems to be absent every time we speak about student success is the role of student affairs, or in South Africa we call it student development and support. And I'd just like to know, where does student affairs fit into the higher education student success discourse? And to what extent can student affairs, because there's a lot of work that's being done across the world, and I know in South Africa a lot of work is being done within student development and support to support retention, holistic development, and throughput. So my question is, to what extent can student affairs be leveraged to enhance holistic student support and success?
So I don't think we're intentionally leaving out the student affairs. In fact, in most of the redesign work early with the Achieving the Dream colleges, it was the student affairs leaders that rallied and took this work on first. And became somewhat frustrated, though, 3 or 4 years into the movement because they were isolated. They were an island. They were not able to get a voice at the leadership table, to scale what they were learning and to make sure student development was not just from a student affairs philosophy or lens, but that there was an institutional philosophy around student development that coursed through every part of the work, right? And I think that's where we are trying to get now. It's interesting because we are seeing in America's colleges one of the biggest areas of opportunity is this the siloed nature of student affairs, and then we call it academic affairs. And very often, teams and leaders that have natural alliances instead creating walls and barriers internally and stifling the conversation that needs to be lateral. And that happens especially around faculty role in academic advising and whether faculty should be able to understand what's happening in student affairs, and then student affairs counselors and advisors who don't think faculty should be involved in that work. But somehow, and many of our colleges, it's funny, a lot of the community colleges, different than a university. I think universities look at student affairs and student development as a learning opportunity, right? There are learning objectives. There's a philosophy. In community colleges, very often the student affairs areas are more transactional. They're helping students get into classes and through systems and barriers like financial aid, and there's not necessarily a student development philosophy built into the way they're interacting with students. And so I think that's why there is this, you're sensing this gap. I think it's because of the nature of the way community colleges are structured. And we need to improve in that way. I'm coaching a college right now that has a very strong student development philosophy in their student affairs area. And very, very, very good. And they have a number of learning objectives and assumptions. But that particular college is struggling the most with infighting between academic affairs and student affairs because their student development philosophies don't match. So I don't know if that resonates, but that is a great, great question.
Hello, I'm Andrew Crouch from University of the Witwatersrand. I almost said Western Cape. Thank you for the presentation. I know that the community colleges are embedded in the communities, so there might not be a need to actually have resident students where the students are in residence. Can you just, from the network which you are involved in, give us insight on how many of these community colleges actually have residences? And if one looks at throughput and success, how do they differ from the ones that, in fact, where the students are staying at home, et cetera, and where they have home support?
Wow, that is such a great question. And you're asking a question that's on the kind of the bleeding edge of some of the work of America's community colleges. So there is a movement afoot for community colleges to create more residential opportunities for their students. Maybe 10% of community colleges actually have residences, but we see more and more moving into that space because of drivers like food insecurity, housing insecurity, and this idea that if we can create a stronger ecosystem of supports and we can leverage additional dollars that we're right now not able to access, we can create a stronger student success environment. So that's the hypothesis, but there's been no research that I'm aware of that shows that community colleges that have successfully integrated a residential philosophy into their framework have more success than the community colleges that have not been able to do that or choosing not to do that. But it is a trend, and there, in some respects, I think I worry that community colleges could be moving into that for the wrong reasons. In other words, building residential opportunities in order to build enrollment rather than to build student completion. Many of our colleges in the United States, in different parts of the country, the Northeast, for example, are in a pretty rapid cycle of enrollment decline because of the way the demographics in the Northeast, less high school student graduates, and they are beginning to build dorms, and they're beginning to offer programs that are not necessarily for the local community, but are for more regional or cross state kind of work. And so they're bringing students from outside of their typical service area into the community college, and they're struggling, frankly, with that particular model. So I think it's something for us to take a look at, but we don't have any evidence that the community colleges that have built residence halls under the assumption that it will improve student success, that it's actually improving student success. There are ways, I think, that you could design it, and it's probably it's a good research agenda for us to be thinking about.
Yeah, we have seen, there are, as Karen said, there are very few community colleges with residence halls, and some of them might specialize in international students and things like that. So it's a different demographic, whereas I know in South Africa, with the change in university access for families under 350,000 Rand, they get housing, right, and they get food. So there's a lot of demand for housing. So it's a slightly different question, because the mission of the two types of institutions are so different. So I wouldn't, if there's no evidence in the United States on this one, it doesn't necessarily mean there's no opportunity in South Africa. It's because it's a different market.
I agree, and I think that we've seen some community colleges build residence halls to attract international students. For whatever reason in their mission, they've decided to do that, and sometimes to attract athletes. So one of the colleges that is on that Aspen top 10 list, Odessa College, which is a fabulous institution, and their big, bold change was changing the semester structure and going to 8-week continuous enrolled classes. But they have residence halls on their campus for athletes, and none of the athletes come from the local community. They come from all over the world. So the question is, what is the mission-centric purpose then of those residence halls?
Any other questions? Well, I think we're eating into tea time, so I will thank Karen for a wonderful, thoughtful discussion. Thank all of you, and the conversation continues. Thank you. Oh, we have a gift.